Hello and welcome to the Blood Podcast Birth, Love, Experience, and Death. I'm your host, Stephanie Bushak,
And I'm your co-host, Matt Bushak.
and today we are going to do a podcast about Ryan's diagnosis.
Yeah, so Ryan is our son with autism, and so this episode may not be as funny.
Yeah, we'll do our best, but we're working with some pretty heavy subject matter.
Yeah, this whole thing has been hard for us, this journey with Ryan. So, but we'll start at the beginning. Steph,
Yes.
do you want to start there?
Yeah, so as we've said in a previous podcast, Ryan was a twin, born in August of 1999, and probably around early 2001, maybe mid 2001, um, I started to notice some things about Ryan that seemed a little bit different than Sunny.
Can I back up just a sec?
Yes,
Ryan developed normally. Like
he did.
he was until that time, he said his first words
Yes.
before Sonny did. He walked before Sonny did. He was interactive and engaged.
Yeah, he used to point at things and he would laugh appropriately and make eye contact. And yeah, everything seemed pretty typical up until this point. The only real issues I would say that Ryan ever had as a baby is he did have colic, um, which basically means he cried a lot.
Mm.
And when we first started to introduce solids at about somewhere between 6 and 8 months, he started to develop rashes on his face, which later we were told was eczema, which he still has. And I have it too. So, anyways, yeah, probably about a year and a half when the kids were about a year and a half to 2 years, somewhere in between there, I started noticing that Ryan wasn't pointing as much at things. He wasn't showing as much interest uh, in different things. He started to not come when his name was called. And at first, I thought he might have hearing issues, but
Yeah, that makes sense.
But he had no problem running into the living room as soon as Barney would come on.
Right. Yep. You know he could hear Barney.
So I'm like, wait a minute. He has no problem knowing when he's in the other room that Barney and friends just came on. But when we're standing in the same room together and I'm going, hey, Ryan, hey, buddy, come here, he's totally ignoring me. Um, when I would sit and read books to the kids in the evening, Sunny had no problem sitting right next to me or in my lap, following along with the book, pointing at things, asking questions. Ryan would not sit still.
Yeah, he was always full of energy. It's I think it's a sensory integration thing that he has. When he was younger, you put your kids down to sleep and you wrap them up in a little papoose in their blanket. Ryan, we'd have to wrap him up so tight because he would get out of it and then fuss. And so the tighter we could get it, the better he would sleep.
Yeah, because that papoose didn't usually last very long. He actually had a nickname growing up, and it was Houdini. And
Yeah,
that
because he could escape.
the Houdini started pretty early because he was pretty quick to unwrap himself from that papoose. So we called him Houdini because
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
frightening how tightly we would put that thing on, and he still found a way out
I
of it.
know. We'd be putting a lot of tension on there, and
Yeah.
but
So, yeah, so I started out, typically developing, and I started seeing little things here and there that kind of concerned me. But honestly, I couldn't really put my finger on it. And so,
and and she would tell me, and I was in denial. I mean, these were this kind of talk completely uh, sidestepped all that I had planned for having Ryan. All the things that I planned to do with him.
Yeah. So, so at about the 2 year visit, you take your kid into the pediatrician every few months when they're little and get all their shots and checkup and stuff like that. When I took the kids in for their 2 year checkup, by this point I was like super concerned. And this is like, early days of internet, and there's not a whole lot of information on different disabilities or learning issues. And so I asked the pediatrician,
This was when Amazon only sold books.
yes,
That's how old.
that's how old it was. And the pediatrician, um, was too busy showing me his photos from his vacation.
He went on some marvelous
Yeah,
vacations.
apparently he had some marvelous vacations, and I'm thinking that's great and all, but something doesn't seem right with Ryan's development. And he told me, quit comparing the two. All children develop at different rates. He's totally healthy. Don't worry about it. And I walked away from that appointment feeling like something still wasn't right, and he was not satisfying my quest for what is going on with Ryan.
But she did have a great time seeing all the great
Yeah,
vacation
no
places that
shit.
we got to
Okay.
go. We're gonna
So,
go someday.
yeah, right. Okay. Thank you for all your photos of Japan or wherever it was that you went. That's awesome. Um, he literally like took out a wad of photos and was like, "Hey, I just got back from Japan. Let me show you some photo." And I'm thinking, I don't have, how do you have time for this? There's two children in this appointment. Whatever. Anyways.
He showed us how much doctors got paid.
Yes, and I still know that doctor's name. I will not dox him on the podcast, but
Why not?
no.
You're
So
too nice.
I know.
I don't remember his name.
He
Dr.
I he
Asshole is
was
what I would say.
I know what it was, but I'm not going to say what it is. And I think he was very, very new to being a pediatrician. And so he had a very optimistic view of everything, which is fine, but you need to be real when something's not right with one of the kids. So,
And
anyways,
and in fairness, back then, autism was so rare. Um, and we'll probably get into that a little bit
yeah,
more.
we
But
will.
so even though there were some signs, doctors may not have been trained up on that as well.
Right. So, anyways, I happened to have like some sort of doctor's appointment a couple of weeks after that I went to. And back then, we didn't have our cell phones. So we had a bunch of magazines in the waiting room. And I pulled up one of the
For you young listeners out there, magazines are monthly or weekly publications of written material
written material.
because we didn't have the internet, so we had
Yes,
to read these
we
things.
had to read things on paper. And I read an article in one of the parenting magazines that touched on autism. And when I was reading the article, I read it twice and then took it with me into the appointment I had because I was like, this sounds almost exactly like Ryan. And it was freaking me out. So when I got home, I got on the internet and I looked up autism and what are some of the symptoms of autism. And that also were the same symptoms that I had read in the magazine. And then I stumbled across something. I know the acronym for it was CHAT, CHAT. I honestly, off the top of my head, I cannot remember what it stood for, but it was basically an autism checklist. Um, so I printed off the checklist and it had probably about 30 things on there. And I checked almost every single thing on the list for Ryan. And then I cried.
And then she brought it up to me, and again, I was a skeptic. The rates of autism were so low. It's like, well, it can't really be that, because that would be so. And again, that diagnosis is such a huge effect on our lives, on his life, on everything. And so I fought that diagnosis. And so when Stephanie brought me this stuff, I just kind of blew her off. I'm like, it's not that bad.
Yeah. So, excuse me, not only am I figuring this out, but I'm figuring it out on my own. I'm not getting a lot of support and I'm feeling really isolated on this and I'm wondering, am I crazy?
Yes, she's
And
crazy.
so um I just kept like obsessing over autism for like a day or two. And then finally I thought, you know what? No, no, he has the symptoms that he has like out of 30 symptoms, he had like 27 of them. I'm like, this has to be what is going on with him. It has to be. And so I called his pediatrician and I said, hey, I pulled up this chat checklist for children with autism, and I started reading off every single one of the symptoms and what he was positive for. And at the end, his doctor said, yes, it does sound like he has autism. I'm so sorry I didn't recognize that when you were in the appointment last time. And, I'm crying the whole time that I'm reading all this stuff off to him, and I am pissed that he didn't recognize any of this stuff. And he tells me, well, the state has a birth to three program. You should go like get diagnosed at a hospital with like a neurologist and then call the birth to three program. And that's it. Like I didn't even get a phone number for the birth to three program or the neurologist. Like I had to look up a children's neurologist and yeah, so it was very, very emotional dealing with all that.
So yeah, we got the appointment scheduled, and again, my mindset is, you know, hopefully nothing's wrong. They did a hearing test, like a passive hearing test, where they can tell whether his ears are picking up the sounds or not, and he passed. So we knew he didn't have a hearing issue. One of the things we would do, so he just kind of went catatonic, during this time. I mean, he went from engaging to not no eye contact
Yeah,
whatsoever.
no eye contact, staring off into space. He would get hyper focused on things like he really loved lining up all of his toys.
Hmm.
And he had a major interest in like his dress up, like specifically hats. Um, he, but all of his toys, he would not play with them appropriately. He would not interact with his brother. It was all just about lining up his toys and sorting them.
Yeah, he was just doing his own thing. It's almost as if we didn't exist. So we went to this. So they did test his hearing, and that came out fine. And then the neurologist and the speech pathologist observed him for a couple hours, maybe, or an hour or so
Yeah,
while we were
yeah.
there.
Yeah, asked a ton of questions, had us fill out a whole bunch of paperwork.
And so at the end of that appointment, they brought, well, they brought Stephanie and I in a few days later because it was just us. I remember that. So they brought us in and they sat us down and they said, your son has autism. And I remember driving home from that being extremely emotional, extremely angry that this tag is now on my son that makes such a difference in what we're going to do and how we're going to live our lives. Um, I cried because it was overwhelming, and
Yeah.
it was a tough.
And back then, they didn't offer a lot of hope. I mean, it was kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, they have autism. They're never going to learn to drive, or they're never going to date. They're never going to, hold down a job. They're never going to do X, Y, and Z.
there was a, and this is not true, but there was a thought that if a child didn't talk till the age of 7, then they would never develop words.
5.
5,
Yeah.
and that's not true because Ryan's developed words,
Yes,
and
he's
he's
still developing a vocabulary. And we'll in another episode we'll give you a better picture of where Ryan is at now. But right now we're just going to talk about his
kind of the story of
yeah,
and unraveling of his diagnosis.
yeah. So anyways, once I found out what the diagnosis was, I tried to do a bunch of research. I went to the library and got a bunch of books on autism.
For those of you who are unfamiliar and young, a library is a place where they keep things that are books, which are different than magazines because they don't come out as often.
And they're usually thicker and give more detailed information on certain subjects.
Yeah, they're like the long audio books instead of the
Yeah,
short ones.
yeah. So, yeah, I probably read about, I don't know, I'd say at least 5 or 6 books on autism. Going online, it was early days, kind of not early days internet, but it was still kind of early internet. And, I try to look up like research papers on it, which I didn't have access to. And
We were trying to find out why he has it and what we can do to fix it.
yeah, I think
I
in
mean,
the
that's what the
beginning,
natural
yeah,
thing
I
is.
think in the beginning there was a lot of like, why him? Is this genetic? Is it environmental? Is it both?
Is it the vaccines?
Yeah, was it the vaccines? So yeah, and not only that, but we learned that at the time, now it's different now. But the statistics back in 2001 were that about 1 in every 10,000 people had autism.
Yeah, it was very, very rare.
Very rare. And Ryan had there's something called pervasive development disorder, which is when they're not for sure if your child has autism, but they're exhibiting enough characteristics of autism that they would like to give your child, quote, a label, unquote, to help them get services. And so he wasn't PDD. A lot of other people I met along the way in his youth, their children were initially diagnosed with PDD, and then at some point they either dropped the PDD diagnosis altogether or they were diagnosed with autism or autistic disorder.
And I want to say something. Um, I was afraid of Ryan having a tag, a label of what his disability was, and I've found a lot of parents really worry about that early on. And I'll tell you this, accept any label that they can give you because that will qualify him for services, even if he or she does not have autism, that they're at least getting a head start on
Yes,
whatever issues that they're dealing with.
yes. Yeah, that's something you don't want to fight too much because, like Matt said, that can be really important in any kind of services or education that your kid gets.
And don't let that label be, don't be scared of that label. I mean, it's a scary thing,
Yeah, but
but
it's not the end all be all.
the label itself, you don't need to be scared of because we need, again, we need those labels. It's like um, we need those labels in order to get help.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, so that is like the ignition, and I want to say when I was doing research, they didn't have a lot of information on autism at the time. And I read some pretty scary things in those books. And it's because unbeknownst to me, those books were incredibly outdated. Some of the books that was reading were from like the 50s and the 60s. And they had a term back then that they coined called refrigerator mothers. And they basically said, and I got probably 2/3 of the way through one of these books and was like, fuck that noise. And I closed the book and was like, I'm not reading that because it actually promoted the theory of refrigerator mothers and said that these children were the way that they were because they were raised by parents, usually in a higher income family, that did not pay enough attention to their children, basically.
And Stephanie, I mean, she can be cold. She's an ice queen, but she was
Only to
so
Matt,
she
not to my children.
she was such a is such a loving mother that there's no way that label could fit her.
Well, and not only that, we actually practiced something called attachment parenting when the children were born, which basically means, yeah, trying to keep your babies as close to you as you can at all times. If you can have them sleep right next to you in the bedroom, that's attachment parenting. If you can strap on a carrier and carry them around the house with you while you're doing chores, that's attachment parenting. Our number one goal with our children was to have a good bond with them when they were babies. We wanted to make them feel as loved and as comfortable and as seen as possible. And if anything, we paid too much attention to them instead of not enough. So that book just pissed me off when I read that part.
Whatever the case, it didn't matter how much time we spent with our kids early on or later on, because shit.
It didn't, no. And so I guess my advice to anyone that may be thinking that their child is on the spectrum or it has a child that's newly diagnosed, check the date on the book that you're reading and don't read anything that's like before the 1990s.
Well, they definitely have better resources online now, which
Yes.
give you everything you need.
But some of us still prefer to pick up a book or listen to an audiobook. Just double check when that was written. And if it was written before the 1990s, just don't even.
Yeah, because we saw the statistics. You know, Ryan was diagnosed. It was one in 10,000, but it probably wasn't really by then. That was just the research that they had. It quickly went to one in 1,000, and then one in
Yeah,
500, and
and
then
now it's one in like 50, I think.
yeah. So it's definitely
And the spectrum's a lot broader now too, honestly. When Ryan was diagnosed, that when somebody would say the autism spectrum, they didn't say the autism spectrum back then. They said autistic disorder. And when you heard somebody had autism, it was a classic nonverbal echolalia. I mean, there was like a certain amount of things that went on. It wasn't until later that they started to realize, hey, some of these kids are more profound, some of them are more high functioning. We need to put this under a spectrum. So the spectrum wasn't even around when Ryan was diagnosed.
the only thing I knew about autism when Ryan was diagnosed was the movie that Dustin Hoffman was in called Rain Man.
Yes,
And which is an excellent movie, and I think Dustin Hoffman does a pretty good portrayal
yes,
of
yes.
a man with autism. But he's, you know, he can speak, he can carry on conversations, he can engage. He has this weird superpower where he can count things like cards and
Yes.
toothpicks.
Guess what? Not everybody with autism has a superpower.
So when you see those motherfuckers on TV that are blind and autistic and they go, no, I'm sorry, they're not. But if you see, you know, so many people come up to us and like, oh, your child has autism? Yeah, I was watching TV and this blind and deaf child sang America the Beautiful and he has autism and I'm just like, fuck you, okay? My kid doesn't do that. That's not autism.
There's this saying in the autism community, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism.
Yes, correct.
Because
Correct.
everybody's unique. We all know that. But even in the autism community, even within the spectrum, in the microcosms of the spectrum, everybody's unique and everybody has totally different behaviors and interests and learning
And
styles
quirks.
and quirks.
I will tell you this, if you don't mind me jumping in.
Yeah.
Um, out of the, gosh, probably 30 different families that we know who have a child with autism where Ryan's met in school or in Special Olympics, Ryan is one of the most profound.
Yes.
There's only two or three
Yeah,
kids that are
I know
as
of three other kids that I would say are on par in different ways with Ryan
right.
as
You,
far as how profound his autism is.
I mean, we know kids that were, I call them kids, they're adults now, but that were,
To us, they'll always be kids.
that's right. So they were in, special ed classes with Ryan and now have jobs and drive a car. Um, uh,
They're
maybe,
pretty independent, a lot of
yeah,
them.
yeah. Some can live by themselves. Although, there's a story of a friend who had a child with autism who lives by himself, and a salesman, door-to-door salesman, came by and was able to scam him for quite a bit of money, but they got it back. But that's the kind of thing, they can live on their own, but they're still not.
They're always going to need some sort of support.
Yeah, yeah.
It may be far away support, or it may be right there, hand over hand support, but they're always going to need someone looking out for them.
So a couple of things I wanted to get into before we wrap up is just, some of the things that we tried. We were desperate parents. We wanted desperately for our child to speak, to engage, and to really, um, be part of what we were doing. So we tried several things.
Yeah, and that'll be the next podcast. We'll go through some of Ryan's behaviors and some of the different treatments that we tried with him throughout the years.
Okay, I got you. Fine, you'll have to wait.
Matt's trying to go into it, and I'm like, dude, they don't want to sit here for an hour straight and
I'll
listen to
wait
all
until
this.
she leaves and then I'll tag this onto the podcast. And I'll pretend to be her, like, oh yeah, that's so right. So maybe we can wrap up with this. Stephanie, what does Ryan's diagnosis mean to you?
It at the time that he was diagnosed, it honestly it crushed me. It was some people don't like to hear this, people that are on the spectrum, but in a way it was like a death because when you have a child, you have certain, whether you realize it or not, you have certain expectations for what kind of life that child will have and what kind of a relationship you will have with that child. And we had to redefine all that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Is that all you want to say about how the diagnosis meant to
That,
you,
that how the
or?
diagnosis was to me, yes. Um, it was hard.
Yeah, I agree with that. I remember. So what the diagnosis means to me, I do remember arguing with Stephanie, saying, hey, if he has a broken arm, we go to the doctor, they x-ray it, they say he's got a broken arm, they put a cast on it, and then he's better after a while. With autism, there's no there was, especially at the time, I mean,
You were on your own.
the schools wouldn't use ABA therapy because it wasn't a proven method, which nowadays that's the gold
Yeah,
standard.
they call it behavioral support. They
Well,
don't call it ABA therapy anymore because the original ABA therapy had a negative aspect to it of reward and punishment. And nowadays, over the last, 20 years or so, ABA does not have the negative aspect of punishment anymore. It is solely positive reinforcement or avoidance instead of punishment.
so so what the diagnosis meant, I had I had dreams for my kids, I wanted them to do the things. I grew up with a single dad, and so I didn't get to experience a lot of the extracurricular activities that I would have liked to, and we wanted to our kids to experience that. Um, and like just something simple. Like I love playing basketball. It's my favorite sport. I love playing. I love watching it. And Brian was going to be my basketball buddy. Um, And that was just ripped away from me in one diagnosis, in one 10-minute conversation with a neurologist and a speech pathologist. And I was absolutely crushed. Um, I I I wanted a different outcome. I wanted a different child. And so it really is. It's tantamount to going through the process of losing a child.
Yeah. And I remember when he was first diagnosed, you and I had like a major heart to heart that went through the night, like we didn't even sleep that night, um, about like all of our dreams, our hopes, our expectations with each other, with our children, what this is going to look like for our future, what kind of things could we do or not do now that this diagnosis was in our life. It was a very, very emotional, very long conversation that we had. And also, we were being told and going online looking that statistically about 80% of marriages end over a child having an autism diagnosis. And Matt and I have always been each other's priorities, and we did not want that to happen to our marriage. And so that wasn't the only conversations. We've had tons of them over the years, but that was the first initial raw, emotional, let's talk about this and what this means for our family. And to this day, I remember, you know, I was really deep into the game of Bejeweled.
Was that before Candy Crush or
Yeah, oh yeah, that was
Crispy
way,
Cupcakes
yeah, yeah,
or whatever that was on
yeah,
Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
yeah. That was before all that, and it was a game that I like to play here and there throughout the day. And every time I hear that music nowadays, like it
Yeah.
has a certain soundtrack that goes to it.
Hmm.
And if I hear that, I flash back to when Ryan was diagnosed.
Yeah.
There's little things that when they creep in. So, anyways, yeah, it was honestly at the time it was devastating, and we felt very alone in our little world, and we felt very terrible for Ryan. And what do we do to give him a good life and give him all the opportunities. And we knew we'd have to work really hard for everything, and it was scary.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that kind of sums up
Yeah,
scary and
overwhelming.
overwhelming.
So, anyways, we're going to do a part two on this that you'll get to hear next week.
Part
Um,
dual,
a part D,
whatever.
yeah, where
Dose.
dose, yes, duo,
I
yeah.
think you're making shit up now.
Now I'm trying to think of what the Italian word is for it.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah. So, anyways, yeah. So next week we'll talk about some of Brian's behaviors, some of the different kinds of interventions and therapies, and we hung on every word of everybody saying try this and try that. So we'll let you know some of the things that we tried out, what worked and what didn't, and yeah. So that was just the intro. If you have any questions, about Ryan's diagnosis, feel free to leave a question on the website, Bled Podcast, BLEDPODCAST.com. To see the podcast on the website, click on the upper right-hand corner of the screen. It'll take you go to podcast. Um,
And you can also find an email link there if you
Yes,
want to
and we're
email
on
us.
lots of different streaming services as well. Please be sure and rate us and leave a comment on whatever service you're on. And hey, Matt, guess what?
What, Steph?
Life will kill you.
Ah.
Ah. All right, love you, kids.